Good morning and good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. As the chair of the IPA Publications Committee, I am delighted to share this new book event about adolescence, which everybody knows is a wide field of interest in the current time and context. Our book brings together international contributors to share their theoretical and clinical work. It considers the different psychopathological responses we see in adolescent patients and how they can be investigated. It also provides some tools of the challenging times the patient and the analyst should go through during this period. Adolescent psychoanalysis constantly confronts us with a transit process in which life, sexuality, acting, and also death are played out. The drive movements that remarkably come into play are expressed through the body as acting out or passage to act, acting that in many cases takes the form of an intrusive and violent act for the adolescent himself and his family, friends, and social environment. The precariousness of intrafamiliar and social ties, isolation, and loneliness led us to believe in the pseudo-intimacy of social networks. It has been reassuring throughout the pandemic. It allowed us, in many cases, to be close to our patients, but at the same time, it has isolated us. The mobilization of the pubertal process begins with the physical and psychic transformations that confronts the adolescent with the resumption of the conflicts pending during latency, returning to pre-Oedipal archaic phantasmatic conflicts, reworking the Oedipal conflict of the genital period, and slowly situating himself in a sexual identity. The pubescent body and its passage to adolescence could be complicated due to a transformational psychophysical state that doesn't happen simultaneously. The adolescent body can escape self-controls and thus harm or attack itself or others. Self-harm, as well as other symptoms such as alcohol, social network addiction, as well as drug addiction or anorexia, are some examples of profound disorders that originate in the mother-infant relationship, subsequently being involved in family, social, and cultural factors. The effect of the pandemic on the mental health of children and adolescents has been fierce. Consultations have multiplied around the world, and mental health systems have failed to address this immense suffering adequately. Socioeconomic and political uncertainty is rampant. We are increasingly aware of devastating inequalities and a lack of protection for many. Technology invites our daily lives, generating a perpetual spectacle of distraction that obstruct thought. Thrown onto the horizon of the virtual and communication networks, the adolescent who self-harms exhibit her or his body subject to the system of the networks, trying to make the screen a corporal and subjective place. It is through destructive tendencies, whether attacks on the body, attempts, and suicides, where traces of discomfort are woven from the fact of feeling transparent, incorporeal, and non-existent. According to the patient's history, the transition to adolescence can include diverse factors that must be processed. This book shows different processes that could help us as a creative tool in our clinical practice with severe psychic failures throughout this transit. Each chapter addresses a specific topic, focusing on representing the clinical realities facing psychoanalysis in treating adolescents with diverse types of disturbances at the psychic level. They cover a range of situations and perspectives, including discussions of the erotic field, self-mutilation, social withdrawal, maternal violence, attempt and suicide also, with a core focus on issues affecting contemporary adolescents. This book presents an innovative approach that reestablishes the impact of significant object responses on the impasses for narcissistic suffering. We hope this book will be of significant interest to all of psychoanalytic and psychodynamic clinicians and other fields working with adolescents. I want to thank the writers from different regions to contribute. Thus, the book event selected the analyst of the English, Turkish, French, and Italian languages. Next month, our Spanish language contributors will share their thoughts with us. Now I will give the floor to my colleague and friend Rafael Monzrak. He is a medical doctor and psychoanalyst member of the Porto Alegre Society, Brazil, a professor at the Luis Guedes Center, and a member of our publications committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and Sylvia for presenting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just be organizing and actually hosting a little bit the activity. I'll just present our presenters that are already here. They're going to speak.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, Dr. Francois, we can hear you. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Through telephone. Through telephone.
Okay. I'll ask you after for your presentation, but now it's working. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask each presenter to be on time, around 10 minutes. And after that, we'll have time for the question answers. We'll be using, if you want to use the raise hand options, you can. You can write on the chat after. That will be a possibility. And if we have time and the opportunity, I can call each one of you who wants to make some questions to the presenters, and you can speak as well. Just try to be patient. There's a lot of people in the webinar, which is very good and very complex to put all together to work here. So I think that's the main idea. It's until 1:30 my time, 1 hour and a half webinar, okay? So I'd just like to introduce our first, I'll introduce all of them and then I'll ask for the first. So our first presenter, it's Dr. Mary Brady, already on screen. Dr. Mary Brady is thank you, Rhoda. So Dr. Mary Brady is an adult and child psychoanalyst practicing in San Francisco on the faculties of the San Francisco Center of Psychoanalysis and the Psychoanalytical Institute of Northern California. She's a recipient of the American Psychoanalytic Association Ruthven Award for writing, and she has the book on adolescents and children, Learning to Serve, is forthcoming from Routledge. She's also editor of Braving the Erotic Field in Treatment of Children and Adolescents from Routledge as well. And she's also author of Analytical Engagements with Adolescents and the Body in Adolescents, also from Routledge. She's North American co-chair for the Committee on Child and Adolescent Psychoanalysis of the IPA, and has co-lead psychoanalysis and film group for a decade. We can go to all presenters, please, Rhoda. So the second one, it will be Dr. Martin Gauthier, child and adolescent psychiatrist and a training analyst in private practice in Montreal, Canada. For 25 years, treated children, adolescents, and their families. He's a former president of the Canadian Psychoanalytic Society and the Société Psychoanalytique de Montréal, as well as a former North American representative on the board of the IPA. Our third presenter, Rhoda, please, Nergish, friend and member of the committee as well, adult, child, and adolescent psychoanalyst in private practice in Istanbul, member of the past president of Istanbul Psychoanalytic Association, and she's founding and past board member of the Istanbul Child and Adolescent Psychoanalytical Psychotherapy Association, related to the European Federation. I just put it, and she's also the member of publication committee. The next one, Rhoda, please, our presenter. It will be Dr. Francois Ladame, psychoanalyst and psychiatrist currently in private practice in Geneva, training analyst of the Swiss Psychoanalytic Society, past professor of psychiatry, faculty of medicine in the University of Geneva, and head of the units of adolescents and young adults. Department of Psychiatry, Geneva University, hospitals, past member of the IPA House of Delegates and IPA board, co-founder with Moses Lofer of the EPF Forum on Adolescents and Psychoanalysis. The last book he published is Tourmassou from in Paris. And the next presenter, I think our last, if I'm not wrong, Dr. Thomas Marcacci, dear friend of mine, lives and works in Bologna, psychoanalytical psychotherapist of children and adolescents and full member of the IPA, works full-time in private practice, has a clinic in Bologna, Centro Evo, where he coordinates a team of psychiatrists. And since 2019, he's IPSO editor-elect, committed to spreading the values of candidates' experiences also as a nurturer of the whole psychoanalytic community. Thank you very much, Rhoda. So with no, I don't want to waste any more time, please, Dr. Mary Brady, I'll be here if you need me. Anything, the word is with you. It's a pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much, Raphael. And of course, also to Sylvia and Roosevelt for creating this book with all these different voices. And to the IPA, which does such a wonderful job at organizing so many things. But this particular chapter came out of a presentation I did with Anne Alvarez at the IPA in London. And so my paper is Braving the Erotic Field in the Treatment of Adolescents. And in speaking with the group that was present about working with adolescents in terms of the erotic transferences and countertransferences that emerge, there was such a sense of the delicacy of this area and people's understandable anxiety about wading into it, even though, you know, of course, sexuality has been a preoccupation of psychoanalysis since our beginning. So thank you to the IPA for all those different opportunities. So again, my chapter in the book is Braving the Erotic Field in the Psychoanalytic Treatment of Adolescents. And so I'm going to give you just a bit of it, including some of the clinical material, so you'll have a sense of the chapter. And then I look forward to hearing my colleagues as well. So the catastrophic prospect of boundary violations, particularly with minors, can lead to a timid avoidance of the erotic in our work with adolescents, yielding what I term here erotic insufficiency. With rare exceptions, the area of erotic transference and countertransference in the treatment of adolescents is largely ignored in analytic writing. In order to consider these ideas, I will relate a period in the analysis of a 12-year-old boy when the erotic transference and countertransference were at a height. I will also suggest that the terms erotic transference and erotic countertransference do not fully capture the intensely interactional nature of these experiences. I suggest erotic field better conveys this fluidity. And maybe I'll say in terms of the extent to which these issues are ignored, when I was writing this chapter, I searched PepWeb and found 1,785 references for erotic transference, 592 for erotic countertransference, 15 for erotic transference adolescents, and only 3 for erotic countertransference adolescents. So we could wonder about that, of course. The emerging bodily experiences of the adolescent, first menstruation, first wet dream, first masturbation to orgasm, and so on, are parts of a virgin territory. For the analyst, the patient's pubertal development can rouse feelings of venturing into a particularly taboo, forbidden, loaded, and vulnerable area. This can create hesitancy and inhibition in the analyst, making her less likely to be able to stand for the acceptance and containment of these sensations and emotions. Andrew Samuels, a post-Jungian analyst, suggests that, these are his words, the subtle damage and deprivation caused by erotic deficit is far less spoken of than what is caused by erotic excess. Physical incest takes place at an appallingly high frequency, but something equally central and much more benevolent in sexuality is being overlooked. That's the end of the quote from Samuels. I prefer the term erotic insufficiency, as deficit implies a lack of capacity, while therapists' avoidance of the erotic is often caused more by discomfort and anxiety than incapacity. I'll now tell you a bit about the case in the chapter. Frank, a sensitive 12-year-old boy with a cool teenage demeanor, appeared at least 12 years older than his actual age. He turned out to be about 6'3". He was in analysis for depression following his parents' divorce. Now, 2 years into the analysis, Frank's depression had diminished and an erotic transference developed, partly under the pressure of puberty and also in response to our having begun a 4th weekly session. Frank felt that I had a special interest in him, as demonstrated by my wanting to see him so often. He had first complained that the 4th session was too much time and took away from other things. However, at one point, I noted aloud that he seemed distant following my having been away. I commented, "It's easy to feel if someone is not there that they don't care about you." He replied, "I know you care about me because of the 4th session." This was the end of the hour. And I'll say, you know, of course, part of working with children and adolescents is that the setup is so different than sitting across from an adult in a chair or on a couch. So in this session, we were sitting on the floor playing a game of, it's called Pick Up Sticks. I don't know if it's a universal game, but so there's these kind of foot-long sticks. So as he got up to go, he touched my leg with one of the pickup sticks we'd been playing with and commented that my stockings were shiny. At times, I noticed Frank looking at my breasts. Another time, he looked at my legs and said, "Are they stockings?" I said, "Guys your age are often curious about girls' things like stockings and underwear. Another thing about your age is that there are a lot of intense changes in one's body that can often feel hard to talk about." Frank replied with emotion, "I know what you mean. I'm beginning to have acne and other people my age aren't getting it yet." And in this next little vignette, we were sitting at the play table. You know, I'm sure he was enormous for it already. But so again, the intimacy of child treatment, we're sitting, you know, I'm on this side, he's on that side, but, you know, within a foot of each other. So in this session, he touched my, he was drawing, we were drawing. He touched my wedding ring and asked, "What stone is it?" I said, "You may be wondering not just what stone, but what the ring means." He says, "That you're married." I said, "Maybe, but then there's also what that means to you because you're pretty close to me." He said, "Have you seen the movie When Harry Met Sally? The man in the movie didn't notice the woman at first." I said, "You're noticing girls more in general, but also noticing me in that way." It was near the end of the session, and Frank was tracing the veins in his forearm with his finger. I was struck by the change in his forearm over the 2 years I had seen him. In this amount of time, he'd gone from the forearm of a boy to that of a man. At this moment, I felt attracted to him in the same way as I might toward an adult man. At 12, he had already largely developed the body of a man. It has often been observed that it is a challenge for girls who menstruate early to integrate their experiences, but similarly so for a boy with this sort of body of a man already. Frank hummed the wedding march under his breath another day, and more than once slipped and asked why we had not met on the 5th day on which we did not have an appointment. I pointed out he might be wishing we met that day as well. The following interchange seems to capture the incestuous aspects of the transference and the anxieties surrounding it. He said, "I was reading about a bank robber who got shot 9 times, shot through the mouth, tongue, teeth. With leprosy, could you have a finger fall off?" I said, "It reminds me of an old wives' tale that if a guy masturbates enough, his penis could fall off. It's not true, but I guess it comes from that part of a guy's body being really important to him." Frank nodded here. And I said, "And worrying something could happen to it." He said, "In drama class today, we were done with work, so we were just chilling, and somebody raised the story of a teacher who had sex with her 12-year-old student and he got her pregnant." This was a real story in the United States in Texas that got a lot of media coverage. She was married and had 3 children. She went to jail, and when she got out, he got her pregnant again. Actually, a film has recently been made called, I think, May, December, about this story. I said, "What did you think about that story?" He said, "It's weird. 24 years older is a little bit of a problem. She was 36," and he kind of trailed off. And I have to say, I was gulping, during this period, hopefully without being too noticeable. I said, "Maybe you're uncomfortable talking about it, as I'm an older woman you're close to, and you're 12. I told him, "I don't think it was good what happened between the teacher and student, but I wouldn't want you to think such feelings are weird." As I said, I gulped internally as I linked this loaded story about the teacher and the boy directly to our relationship. There had been many indicators of Frank's feelings, so it did not feel premature to make this link. I also felt that I was not being seductive, but naming something implicit to make it more explicit. There could be reasons to allow material to evolve in derivative form, or at other times it could feel overstimulating to make a direct link to the analytic couple. As I look back many years later, this comment has a feeling of rightness to me, the linking comment. The situation in the room was stimulating, a boy going through puberty and an older woman. And it's a very interesting thing, this sort of seeing a child from, latency through adolescence. I felt attracted to Frank, as I mentioned, as the forearm moment, as I might to a man, including some preoccupation with these feelings outside of sessions. I believe that in my work with Frank, I always kept in mind that he was a boy and my patient, but the transitions occurring within him were stimulating to him and to me. Retrospectively, the erotic transference countertransference emerged with Frank at a specific time in the treatment in the context of intensive work and has been more in the background subsequently. From a field theory point of view, this constitutes a shared dreaming of the couple. Shortly after my patient's erotic transference reached a height when he was about 13, he started a romantic relationship with a girl his age. She remained his girlfriend for the next 2 years. I was impressed with Frank's growing ability to talk directly with her about his feelings. When I think back to this period in my work with Frank, when erotic feelings were in the forefront, It feels almost impossible to say whose feeling is it. Frank experienced my recommendation of frequent sessions as a possible seduction. His looking at my body was stimulating to me. I think of the complexity of any single moment, such as that I mentioned when Frank traced the veins on his forearm, and I felt attracted to him in a similar way as I might to an adult man. This was my feeling, located in me and unspoken, but Frank's subtle and unself-conscious action might also represent a new sensuality and budding awareness of his body, which I was also reacting to. I will leave my chapter there and turn you over to Raphael for our next speaker.
Mary, thank you very much.
Certainly.
It's unfortunate to have, we wish to have more time to hear you, but a lot of that is in the book, in your chapter. And it's very interesting, your whole study on erotic transference, countertransference, the adolescent style. For me, it's the best part of the chapter. Thank you very much. So our second presenter, Dr. Martin Gauthier, s'il vous plaît, the word is with you. Just your audio. Yes, perfect. And try to be on the 10 to 15 minutes, please. Most.
Yes, I will try. I'll do my best. So, hello, everyone. Thank you to you. Thank you to Sylvia. Thank you to all the contributors. It was a pleasure to be part of this endeavor. So I will try to briefly summarize my own chapter. The title of it was Of Skin and of Self-Mutilation in Adolescents. So it's a different use of the body and of the adolescent experience as compared to what Mary just presented to us. So I tried to address adolescents who self-harm, both from an individual and a social perspective in this chapter. My interest in that topic came from, in fact, having really encountered that problem in my practice 35 years ago when I began, except occasionally in psychotic or mentally handicapped youngsters, to now realizing how much over the past 2 decades or so, how common it has become, especially in the clinical population I was facing or meeting with at the hospital. But it's also quite present in my office nowadays. And in some ways we could wonder if Freud's Dora would now self-mutilate if she was living at this point in time. So what accounts for such an increase? What is going on? If I briefly define self-harm, it's the deliberate and direct alteration or destruction of body tissues without danger to life or conscious suicidal intent. So it excludes injuries presented in psychosis, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, epilepsy, substance use, or adolescents with an intellectual handicap. But it also excludes behaviors that are culturally or subculturally that are connected with a culture or subculture, such as when it's part of a religious ritual, for instance. So in our Western culture, we can have in mind behaviors such as piercing, tattooing, body art, or plastic surgery, all that have now become quite popular. And I will return to mention these behaviors because I will want to return to them at the end when I raise the more social question of such a frequency of self-mutilation at this point in time. Individually, though, teenagers really seek help themselves for self-harm. It's often kept secret, and it's when adults discover it that it easily triggers concerns about suicide and leads to a consultation. And clearly, self-mutilation needs to be assessed within the global psychological functioning of the adolescent. And the group of adolescents who self-harm is in fact very heterogeneous, and there should be no question of bringing them all under the same metapsychological organization. They all largely do not complain about their self-harm, which appears to have an economical, self-regulatory function, having a calming and relieving function effect when an internal tension becomes unbearable. It can take a secondary function, such as becoming a way of attacking a parent, for instance. But the primary gain appears to be of an economical order for the management of an ill-qualified internal quantity. And in fact, the teenagers of more concern that I've treated are precisely the ones where this ill qualification of the internal quantity is the worst. Teenagers that have very poorly established personal psychic space. We could say that not only do they cut more frequently, these teenagers, but they do in isolation, in secret, even with their closest friends, such as the case I present in my chapter, the case of Sarah. So not only do they do it in isolation, but they cut their skin, they cut contact with significant others when in need. They cut with themselves, with parts of themselves, as they use what I would call an anti-metaphorical solution, discharging into tensions instead of elaborating them symbolically. In fact, those more concerning teenagers, the symbolic means remain very limited, acting prevailing over reflecting. Their skin can become like a parchment, full of signs, which they claim to be senseless and no need to be read. So with those adolescents in mind, my own reflection evolved around two questions. The first one came early on. It's why turn to cutting instead of other means of dealing with tensions? Following Mary's presentation, why not turn to masturbation or listening to music or to exercise or take a long shower? We can think of so many of different means used to deal with inner tensions. Obviously, the dimension of hatred, of some masochistic or melancholic source, comes to the clinician's mind when the body is attacked. But this is not a level first available, if at all, with these teenagers. So the use made of the body and of the skin led me to explore further the notion of the skin ego, as defined by the French psychoanalyst Didier Anzieux, as well as the development of heterogeneity. So I guess we could think of self-mutilation as, some kind of perverse way of trying to deal, or an attempt to deal with an heterogeneity difficulty. This concept of heterogeneity was, introduced by Freud in 1914, and it gains now at being conceived not as a biological given, but as a relational construct, a product of object relations. And it has a central role in adolescence, when the individual needs to progressively inhibit and own his or her changing and powerful body. I like to think of heterogeneity as the battery of the self, the converter of raw excitement into libidinal energy at the service of the ego. And heterogeneity can be extended towards the associated concept of autoerotism, a notion, as you know, that Freud borrowed from the English sexologist Havelock Ellis, which has also evolved towards recognizing its relational basis nowadays. So in my chapter, I have wanted to oppose, through autoerotism to what different authors have called autosensory behaviors, where the latter, the internal relationship with the object is not maintained, but evacuated. So this last point led me to my second question, raised by my work with the more concerning teenagers. How can a link, a relation be constructed with those adolescents who in subtle ways cut away from us? And how can the cut off, evacuated parts be brought into the relationship? So this second question led to the recognition of the importance of working on the subtle ways those adolescents cut the link with the analyst. Recognizing that the cuts on the skin comes with an insidious attack on the relationship and the therapeutic work. So this involves to tactfully address the silent disinvestment in order to progressively be able to qualify and symbolize this ill-defined affects and eventually help at creating a more integrating and integrated skin. So finally, and returning to the question of the social sources and meaning of such a large number of adolescents self-harming in our current culture, let me just say a few points. And that certainly remains a very open question, which I would like to discuss. Because historical and sociological factors play a role in the etiology and the expression of psychological distress in adolescence and adulthood. Let's just think about hysteria today as compared to when Dora was 17 and began meeting with Freud. As it was mentioned, I'm struck by the level of distress in contemporary teenagers. And we know that the pandemic has worsened the situation. And I'm also struck by the need to return to the skin in self-mutilation, but also in many socialized practices that are growing in our societies, such as piercing, tattooing, and plastic surgery, at a time of great transformations. So could there be a need to return to the skin in order to rekindle the basis of the skin ego and of heterogeneity, in order to own more fully the connection with oneself and with others, at a time when not only in our adolescence, but in our society, social structures, social envelopes, social skins are in great transformation. And I would make a connection with the focus on boundaries and immigration at this point in time in politics and in the troubles that we're facing around the world. So I'm looking forward to listen to the presentations of everyone else and having a good discussion together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Gauthier. It's very interesting as well, the whole body language in adolescence and your contribution to widens the concepts that we have from adolescence and the whole body, including the setting. And thank you very much. I hope we can discuss after a little bit more. Please, Dr. Nergish, please, the word is with you.
First of all, many thanks to all those involved in organizing the IPA book event. Special thanks to Sylvia Plechner, the IPA Publications Committee Chair, and Raphael Monstrak, a member of the committee. Also, Rhoda Baudecker, IPA Web and Publications Manager, and everyone who's involved in the organization. I'm grateful. It's a great honor and privilege, actually, for me to be one of the contributors to the book. And so I would like to thank for the invitation and also thank again the editors of of the book, The Astonishing Adolescent Upheaval in Psychoanalysis. Our editors were Sylvia Fleschner and Roosevelt Casarlo. So thank you so much. And also I would like to thank to all the esteemed colleagues who contributed in this book. I read all the chapters with great interest. It inspired me. I learned so much, so I'm grateful. Now, within a very limited time, I'm going to sort of try to summarize or let's say give a little outline of what I talked about in the chapter that I wrote. Is the sound okay? Everything okay? All right, okay. My chapter was titled Working with Adolescents, Formlessness, Fears and Transformation. So first of all, I started talking about adolescence and formlessness. And formlessness as an inevitable phase in adolescence where all that is known needs to be discarded to allow something new and which has a potential of richness. Because as we know, during adolescence, everything that felt to be known by the adolescent changes. Their psyche, body, parental figures, thoughts and beliefs have become unfamiliar, and everything starts to feel foreign, and they feel out of control, inappropriate, their feelings fluctuating. So, and I was thinking even their tone of voice sounds different. And as Freud in 1937 wrote in Analysis Terminable and Interminable, adolescence is a period where pressure of the drives is of utmost intensity. So everything is changing quantitatively and qualitatively. Referencing René Cass, I talk about formlessness, which includes creating while destroying and destroying while creating, comprised of chaos and ambiguity. In order to grow, something needs to be buried, killed, left, and what's left behind symbolically in adolescence, as we all know, are parents and childishness. And I refer to Winnicott and Jan Abram. Only out of formlessness and unintegration can a new integrated form, a true self, can emerge. So during adolescence, an environment, a good enough environment that can allow and accompany the natural formlessness and unintegration of the adolescent is needed. An environment that doesn't try to give up form too quickly, prematurely, to this formlessness, and doesn't pressure for adaptability is crucial. Formlessness cannot be transformed unless there's a frame to contain it. I reference Jacques Pré here. For this transformation to take place, there needs to be parents who do not retaliate, abdicate their roles, which Winnicott talks about, and continues surviving in spite of adolescents' aggression and destruction. Of course, all these capacities are linked to the analysts working in the room with the adolescent too. We can think of it like that. And as the capacity to explore and find oneself can only be achieved by an intrapsychically surviving object. This is Jan Abram expanding and developing Winnicott's concept, surviving object. In her book, Surviving Object, maybe you read it. So that's needed. And then I also refer to Jacques and Whereas, sorry for my pronunciation, symbolic cradle metaphor, which I find very, very useful. There is a parallelism between infants and adolescents' needs, as intense emotions are valid for both, and parts of the body, psyche, which are felt to be in pieces, need containing and integration. Just as a cradle forms a boundary protecting and holding the baby from falling, or arms of the parents, which hold the baby emotionally, psychically, when in distress, preventing the baby to disintegrate from anxiety, a symbolic cradle for adolescent is also needed. That's what they talk about, which I find very meaningful. And this symbolic cradle, which has physical, concrete aspects like boundaries and private space, but also a non-physical, abstract frame, providing psychic containing. A rigid, pressurizing frame, as well as too much understanding and lack of boundaries, will prevent adolescents from being themselves. This is what Philippe Jamet and Louise Canisiper also talks about. Then I move on to sort of talking about working with adolescents. And in that section, I mainly concentrate on adolescents' oscillation between different thinking modes and functioning worlds, which is clearly defined by Donald Meltzer. So there's an adult world they might want to enter, a child's world that they want to leave behind, an adolescent world with peers, and also space by themselves in isolation. So they're not anchored in one single port. It's not easy for us in the room, I guess, when we listen to adolescents changing discourse. There's nostalgia for childhood, struggle to take the first steps into adulthood, and all the anxieties, fears, and possible obstacles in achieving this. So it's like we listen to a polyphonic chorus with all the psychic bodily reactions evoked in us, with many associations and images that come before our eyes. And we need to pay attention to all that. And it's a phase where one will need to pay unpaid debts with interest, as Louise Canisiper underlines, and I quote from him, he says, "What's hushed up during childhood generally cries out during adolescence." It's also what actually Ernest Jones talked about. There's a regression in the direction of infancy, and the person lives over again, though on another plane, the development he passed through in the early years. So we need to pay attention to all these dynamics while we are working with adolescents. And then I move on talking about parents of adolescents. And unlike working with only the internalized parental figures of the adult patients, parents of the adolescent are there in body and flesh, active in adolescent's life and therapeutic process. So it's not really possible or functional to leave them outside. And as Anna Freud writes, there are few more challenges in life than trying to support an adolescent become autonomous. So actually, parents need help themselves. And so while providing the adolescents with an individual psychic space to help them form an independent identity, parents also need to be accompanied and supported in their role in assisting the adolescent on this journey. So I really find Novik's ideas about working with parents of adolescents very useful. Of course, akin to how adolescents are trying to find the right distance between themselves and their parents, in our work, we also need to find the sort of proper distance between adolescents and their parents. Certain degree of flexibility regarding how often one sees the parents is needed, depending on each case's unique dynamics. And this needs to be, I guess, evaluated. And of course, transference, countertransference dynamics, including the parents, not just the adolescents, need to be taken into account. Our identifications with the parents, with the adolescent might affect the frame and result in leaving the parents out of the treatment or involving them too much. So in short, not finding much needed proper distance. Of course, the way to meet these challenges, these complex dynamics cannot be reduced to simple ready-made answers or solutions. So after this background of ideas, themes, and the analysts that I rely on, well, some of them, I couldn't include all of them. When you enter the consulting room, these are all in the background. I wanted to give at the end as the concluding vignettes to give body and flesh to all the themes, well, some of them at least, presented. And this is from a clinical work where for a long time, I really felt I were in a survival program being tested for skills of endurance. It was sort of like a roller coaster. To sort of share with you the dynamics, the anxieties, the fears of the adolescent, of the analyst, of the parents, transference, counter-transference issues, how to involve the parents, how to distance oneself, all these complex issues where it becomes quite transparent when you present the clinical work. So that's why I wanted to present the clinical work too. And I'll stop here. Thank you. I hope I haven't passed my time.
No, you're fine. Thank you very much. I know I have limited time, but the idea, and you're capturing very well, just to have the whole idea of your chapters. And of course, I hope that people will read more the book and the chapter, because it's awesome. The whole idea of the adolescent, and each one of you captures one thing that's important: the self-mutilation, the working with patients, working with parents, and the whole adolescent complexity. And that's the main idea. Dr. Francois Ladame, thank you very much again, Gish. So, Dr. Francois Ladame, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. But I am now on another iPad. And can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect. So you can just speak now. It's perfect. We can hear you. The words with you have 10 to 15 minutes, please. It's everything working fine. Thank you.
Before speaking of my paper, I would like to honor the memory of two pioneers of adolescent psychoanalysis, Moses and Igle Laufer. I had the chance to be very close to them from the early 70s until their death in 26 for Mo and 2020 for Igle. We usually approach the issue of suicide in adolescents through the investigation of factors we know are promoting the enactment of suicidal ideas. These factors may relate to psychopathology, clinical symptoms, and/or the socio-cultural environment, including, for sure, the family. Today, my reflection will go exactly the opposite way. I propose not to ask the question, what drives an adolescent to suicide, but what may prevent an adolescent to kill himself. A more provocative version would be why all adolescents don't kill themselves. To put the question in psychoanalytic words, I'll ask about the kind of changes that must take place in the adolescent psyche to later on in his life function as a safeguard against suicide. One of the main developmental tasks of adolescence is to own his or her own life. The ownership of one's own life means feeling responsible for it, taking care of it, and value it, notwithstanding the reality that one has not been self-engendered. My assumption is that an adolescent can only get there once he has been able first to regard suicide as possible, then to identify with the caring and protective side of the object of his past. I am a living subject, but I have the power, should I decide it, to end my life. To be able to feel myself a subject or an I must first have accomplished three fundamental tasks: become the owner of my body, the owner of my drive, and the owner of my thoughts. Let's stop for a moment on the issue of the ownership of one's own thoughts, which is especially relevant in today's context. On the one hand, it implies the child's capacity to go beyond the feeling that his parents know what he is thinking. On the other hand, this development includes the newly acquired capacity of the adolescent to take oneself as an object of reflection. We may say that a subject must be there. A subject has to be constructed to open to the possibility to see oneself as an object of thinking for sure. The door is now open for the adolescent to reflect not only on the issue of life and death, but above all, his life and his death, the origin of his own life, and considering suicide as a possibility. Even if many adolescents try to convince themselves that they are self-engendered, whatever the price they pay, none of us has ever been at the origin of one's life. Hence, the haunting question of the debt towards one's genitals. A patient of mine put it very clearly when she asked the question, what does it mean to be indebted to someone for my own life? What does it mean? But moreover, what does it imply? You probably guess that the patient I am alluding to has been for years and years a rebel, revolting against the order of the world that assigns a place to each human being and conducts the generation succession. Her rebellion drove her to endanger her life to the point she might have died. The adolescent and future adult must survive the reality that he is not self-engendered and he owes his parents his own life. To be able to narcissistically survive such a reality without either falling apart or feeling bound to remain in a state of childish dependency, the narcissism must have been sufficiently strengthened to offer the security of possessing an identity on one's own right and having successfully identified with a living couple of parents. Through this identification with a couple of living and creative parents, the adolescent is also freed of the burden of a supposed eternal debt. As the issue of life and death is in the heart of adolescent development, it makes sense to ask why all adolescents don't kill themselves. The issue of life and death is inescapable, and everyone has to find an answer to while building up one's own identity. In my view, it is not possible to invest one's life, to give it a positive value without having first envisaged the possibility of ending it. The capability to regard suicide as possible goes hand in hand with the opening of a space for thinking, where the subject can take oneself as an object of reflection. In that sense, it contributes in a decisive way to the achievement of the identity's construction. I am all the more able to own my life and disengage from the narcissistic aporia that I was not at its founding, that I have contemplated the possibility to bring it to an end. I now want to emphasize another major safeguard. It will take us back from adolescence to the very early development, because this shelter has to do with the primal relationship between the infant's body and the body of his or her mother. Iglelofer developed the idea of the body as an internal object. This notion allows conceptualizing the memory traces of the emotional experience of the relation between the infant body and his mother, as well as his relation with the maternal body. This notion, while focusing on the affective dimension of the experience, is different from the concept of body image, which is built up from the sensory experiences and perceptions. Most important, this internal object is not only constituted by the memory traces of the infant's pleasant or painful experiences in relation with his mother's body, but also of the traces of the pleasure or displeasure felt by the mother in relation with her baby's body. Only those traces which may be shared in a mutually rewarding way can be introjected and form this loved internal object that is narcissistically invested. The body as internal object containing the fantasy of a complete and omnipotent body while united with the mother body serves as a major defense against helplessness and traumatic anxieties. It also forms a kind of narcissistic shield one can rely on while growing up in order to feel secure and pleased with one's own body. It is probably the best protection against a destructive hatred of one's body, hence against suicide. At the opposite, the infant who was not able to feel enough secure and loved in his primal experience of narcissistic union with the mother's body is forced to build up an idealized body image when he has to face the reality of separateness and differentiation at the Oedipal level. This idealized image permits to maintain a fantasy of omnipotent fusion, at least until puberty. At least until puberty, when the reality of the transformation of one's own body gives the final kick to that fantasy. Then the confrontation with the mother's sexual body, mirroring the adolescent's mature body, leaves room for an hatred of the sexually potent male or female body as being responsible for the illusion of narcissistic union having been swept away. I'll stop here because it's time. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ladam, thank you very much. Also very interesting presentation. I hope I can hear you more from you after. Thank you very much. Please, Thomas, our last presenter, the word is with you. And then we can have some question answers after that.
Yes, thank you, Raphael. Thank you also for chairing this panel. I will share some slides. Well, firstly, I would like as well, like Nergis did, to thank Sylvia, Fletchner, and Roosevelt Cazorla for taking care of the editorial part of this publication. And as said, thank you, Raphael, for organizing and chairing this panel, and thank you, Rhoda, for always helping us in realizing our ideas. So my chapter regards social withdrawal in adolescence. You see? Okay. It is an insidious and serious manifestation of psychological distress that manifests critically in adolescents, social withdrawal. This phenomenon refers to complex situations that can occur along a gradient of severity and where multiple factors are at play that can be observed from multidisciplinary perspectives. There are two main concepts I put forward for consideration in this chapter. The first is how social withdrawal can be understood as a particular manifestation of adolescent breakdown. Maybe like this you can see better the slides. The second regards the need to extend the horizon of analysis beyond the consulting room, both respect to its object and to its subject. But let's start from the first. In social withdrawal, there is a seclusion from reality rather than breaking contact with it, as in psychotic crisis. Self-disuse and deactivation of the intensities at play rather than irrepressible expression of them and fragmentation of the self. Suspension of time rather than derailment from the path or psychotic change of reality. We could call it abeyance instead of breakdown. Opposite phenomenologies, but same meaning. Breakdown of the evolutionary relationship between subject and environment. Abeyance is a particularly insidious psychic situation because it is made up mainly of negative symptoms that remain elusive. It is an extreme defense aimed at protecting one's sense of self. These are situations that proceed silently, where awareness of the severity is slow to be recognized. Cleavages of denegation and the denegations of the patient and his primary relational environment are projected into the context, whether social, institutional, or clinical as well, fragmenting it and hindering its ability to think and contain. Over time, the teenage self, deprived of the nourishment and developmental stimulus provided by contact with external reality, becomes a karst, fragile ground, structuring a psychotic potentiality. Through the chapter, based on some clinical examples, I propose some theoretical and technical considerations. One regards the etiopathogenetic importance of the patient's experience of such a great gap between an ideal expectation and a fragile sense of the self that it is deemed unbridgeable. This unbridgeable gap inhibits the contact with reality. We can advance the hypothesis that this is precisely a central point with respect to both understanding and treating these clinical situations. It is important to reflect in each specific case on what is the role of different psychic instances with respect to the patient's experience of self-inadequacy. What is the relative weight of the superego in bringing to the self a particularly crushing experience, demanding an ideal ego in a sadistic and humiliating way? How heavy is instead the individual narcissistic fragility sedimented through the intrapsychic layers of personal evolution, with respect to which the patient's ego ideal does not stand as a useful spur, regardless of the quality of superegoic pressures? Or what, rather, is the role of a superego ideal, transpsychic content emanating from others' expectations, near or far in time or space, intrusive and alienating for the patient's self and acting him from within? The consideration of which relative weight these instances have will be crucial in guiding our intervention. Further critical aspects we reflect on in the chapter are difficulties in relation with the body, through puberty, the illusion to suspend the flow of time, the difficulties in drawing a subject trajectory from past to present and from present to future. Now, coming to clinical intervention strategies, a first element that stands in the way of treating these patients is, obviously, the difficulty in establishing and maintaining therapeutic alliances. A key variable will be respect to the therapeutic course, therefore, whether the patient is able to have direct contact with the analyst and whether this could be in person or not. I stand with other authors in considering remote analysis as a tool that can offer initial avenues of engagement for these latter situations, a sort of transitional space. Furthermore, the construction of the therapeutic contact should also include the possibility of the analyst himself moving toward the patient's place. The analytic setting is therefore intensely stressed in these situations, both the analyst's psychic setting and the physical one. It will be important, even in situations off the couch, to build a setting, both as an invariant to allow us to grasp the dynamics of transference, countertransference, and as an elaborative container for the projections of the patient's split parts. I propose that this setting could consist of the clinical equipe. And so this leads us to the second fundamental reflection I put forward for consideration in my chapter: how abeyance are clinical situations where the horizon of the psychic to analyze must be extended. In my opinion, the object of treatment may not only be the patient as an individual, but also the relational environment where he lives. Furthermore, in order to do this, the individual analyst will not suffice. There is a need for a further level, an equipe, a teamwork, sufficiently used to work together, taking care of its interpsychic dynamics, so that it constitutes itself as a true analytic subject in itself. Let's delve deeper into this. We could start highlighting the work that working in team is necessary in these situations. Beyond the adolescents analyst, the team should be composed by another analyst for the parents. They indeed are subject, somehow involved in a blocked relational field. It is necessary to consider whether transpsychic elements may play a significant role with respect to the individual's situation. A psychiatrist and an educator should be part of the team as well. And furthermore, one professional should take care of the connection between patient and external environments and possibilities, opportunities. This brings us to one of the pillars of clinical intervention in this situation, to offer the withdrawn adolescent a constant, challenging, and sustainable pull toward sociality. The most important element of this traction toward the world is, in my opinion, its dose. It is an essential part of the clinical strategy that the intervention of all clinicians are coordinated and attuned to the dose sustainable for the patient in that moment. I'll cut something so we'll have time for discussion. Coming to the end, what is mostly important, in my opinion, is that the equipe can constitute itself as a third subject, composed of individuals but exceeding their mere sum. This provided that the team takes care of constituting itself as a working group. On this basis, interpsychic and body resonances between colleagues are created, which allow the team to grasp deep levels of contact with the psychic environment it is dealing with. Over time, across the cases treated, constant elements sediment within the team functioning and become known. This brings the equipe to constitute itself as a setting of the couch for the individual analyst, a second-level container that integrates and signifies the experience that each individual team member has with the patient. Now, this is one of the key messages I would like to propose to you. The team deals not only with the patient's intrapsychic projections, but with relational patterns, functioning of the bond, and space on the background of it. Elements which could be seen as a metapsychic substance beyond subjects, like Kais said. We can think, therefore, that the equipe can provide to these elements a more effective containment experience precisely for it is a metapsychic subject of the same psychic substance, constituted by the structure and functioning of the bond between its members, and because the understanding, containment, and transformation of the evolutionary possibilities of the analytic field occurs also through the very functioning of the team bond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much. It's very interesting, your presentation as well. Okay, we have around 10 to 15 minutes for question answers. So please, everyone, you can either write on question answers or you can try to use the raise your hand options. I will start here. We have a participant that has raised hand. Let me try that. It's Lukia Tsaroshi. Can you hear me? Rhoda, could you please open the... For Lukia Tsaroshi, who has raised her hand. Lukia, can you hear us? Are you still want to make your question?
Lukia.
Well, while we're still waiting on Lukia, we have two comments here in the question and answers. The first one from Emily Billman. She's just writing here that she's agree with the clinical approach of Dr. Marcati, taking into account the complexity of adolescence, which only an interconnected team can contain. Thank you for reflecting my thoughts on this subject. So, and she's still putting a lot of things. The biggest problem of this very effective team-oriented approach would be the resistance we could encounter. Thomas, do you have something on that you can put on? The resistance that can be encountered with working of multi teams, and is that a problem? What do you think?
Well, yes, we can encounter resistances from the patient, from the parents, but also from other colleagues. No, it's. I think it's important to establish a teamwork along the time. No, not just having a collaboration in an like extemporaneous way. You know, because this doesn't allow the team to become a proper container, no, and this will make the enactments of splitted parts more likely from the clinical team as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have another question here, a comment in the question and answer from Cecilia Tayana. Since adolescence, I think this is directed to Martin Gauthier and Ergish probably. Since adolescence is a return to an intensification of toddlerhood, I find Freud's notion of eretogeneity, as discussed by Martin Gauthier and Ergish, particularly compelling. In this context, Freud's 1908 paper on the sexual theories of children is a valuable reference as it addresses the origins of the heightened drive experiences during toddlerhood. Sorry to self-promote, but she has a paper, The Rope of Sexuality, How Children's Researches Prime Infant Sexuality, a Freudian Laplacian View. It's just more a comment on probably what Martin and Nagish has talk about the erotogenicity. Sorry about my English on adolescents. Lucia, Cecilia, do you want to talk something about that? You're on the screen if you want to.
Yes, but I don't see a way to put my camera on, but never mind.
No problem, Cecilia. Just you can speak freely, please.
All right. Well, I just wanted to address perhaps this to Francois, because in a way he took us even further to toddlerhood. It took us to the place of the handling and the holding of the infant and how that generates this protective notion of invested narcissism, which I think is a very important aspect of contemporary adolescence, as it were. But what I want to ask him is whether that we can retroactively also contemplate the placenta as being the first moment of exchange, and whether the studies of the infant in the womb have added to some aspects of psychoanalytical thinking.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't quite understood the end, your question to me.
The question is, since you have taken us back, right, to this holding and handling and the body of the mother, the first encounter with the body of the mother is the womb. And I know that there are many studies that now try to understand what's happening there. And I was just wondering whether you can comment on it, or the life of the relation of the infant with the mother doesn't start at birth.
Yes, I think you are right on the point, because it's something I had no time to comment, but for sure, you see, in my experience, for those adolescents or adults who have not been able to build up this shield, this loved internal object. What outcome? In my personal experience, it's only a very long and intensive psychoanalysis that may allow the patient to regress with the analyst to such a time when really something can be built, not rebuilt, but really built. But as you know, how many people who are suicidal can really enter psychoanalysis. This is the reality we have to face. And you see, I've been working more than 45 years with suicidal adolescents. For sure, of course, we try to do whatever we could, and with as Raphael has said, we can work in a team. We can use psychoanalytic psychodrama. We use it very much in French-speaking countries of Europe, which gives the same result. But and what else? You see, therefore, you see in my life, many patients were dead. And it's a tragedy we have to face. It's our, it's something, you see, something when you work with suicidal adolescents, you must be prepared to the fatal issue. Okay, I stop here. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have time just for one more. I know it's a very short time, just one more, and then I want to ask Silvia to close the activity, unfortunately. So the last question I'll be reading here for Lee Tobias. It's for Martin. Okay, Martin, it's for you. The need to return to the skin, meaning then that the tattooing, piercing links to those in their time, their peers during such massive social change. A link then, not damage. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I know, Lee, and thank you for your question. In fact, yeah, I think you got one important aspect here, which is the differentiation between the teenagers who self-mutilate in isolation by themselves, and which we can kind of ourselves symbolically try to make sense of it and reestablish a connection with. I was struck by how many of our different presentations, there were some links with each of our interest and our thinking, just in terms of the field, the shield, the metapsychic substance beyond subjects, the container in various ways. And so I think the self-mutilation says something about a problem with the connection, both in terms of creating one's own personal space and having a connection with the larger environment, with the larger field. And certainly I think in these socialized behaviors such as tattooing, piercing, I'm impressed by the emphasis on the skin nowadays, especially in front of technology that takes us away and from each other, which can be a transitional tool, as it was mentioned by Thomas, but certainly it's often used, or at least it takes us away from each other. And so I think these socialized behaviors are very interesting in terms of bringing the skin back as a way, as you say, Lee, to have a connection initially, in fact, they appear, these behaviors, in subgroups, and now they extend in a much larger way to the society in general. But I think for us clinicians working with teenagers, I think they often tells us something about the distress of the larger society in their own way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. We have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I have to be very strict with time, that orders I have received. It's not my own fault. It's 1:30. Thank you everyone who has made questions. Unfortunately, I can't read all of them. Just 1 minute, I'll pass to Sylvia to close the activity. We have made a prize a person can get a book, the one we are discussing, and it has been to Patricia Cabrera awarded the book. So Patricia Cabrera, thank you. The book was from the one who had made questions here in the question and answers. After Rhoda will try to reach you in case you have the book. We can try anything else, but in case you don't have the book, it's a prize and award for you. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Just want to give you the word to close the activity. Thank you very much to all of them. It's a great opportunity to be here, though.
Thank you. Thank you, Raphael. I want to thank the presenters and Raphael for conveying our book's main ideas. I hope to meet you again next month. We are going to share this event with the Spanish and Portuguese writers. So it will be fine if you can attend the meeting. You will receive the time where it will be. I am very grateful to all of you and see you again shortly. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.